Insane in the membrane. Insane in the brain. I'm insane. I have no brain. Man. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the HooperCast. This is number 97.
97?
Yeah, the year that Godzilla came out, I think. That was 98. Shit. Okay. Well,
that's okay.
Today, I had some notes on my phone, and I didn't pull them up beforehand, so but we're here on the podcast today to talk about any number of a selection of things, depending on the time. But Dustin, I want to go to you first because I cut your segment last time and you wanted to talk about a movie and we ran out of time, probably because of me. So,
no, because of all of us.
Yeah, that's right. I just thought everything's about me.
Oh, okay.
I'm a martyr right now because while I'm being like self-effacing and apologetic, I'm assuming it had something to do with me automatically.
Yep, pretty much.
Even though I'm saying it's my fault, me bringing up me is still bad.
Exactly.
What was the movie called? Age of Adelaide? Is that it?
Adeline.
Adeline.
Yes, The Age of Adeline came out earlier this year. And let me pull up the Rotten Tomato really quick. I don't know what it has on there.
All I know about this is that it stars Blake Lively.
It does.
And that it was supposed to be like a good performance.
Yeah, she did a pretty good job. I mean, granted, I've only ever seen her in Green Lantern, which was not a great performance. So I don't really, I can't really compare it to herself, if that makes sense. Like, oh, this is better than usual or whatever. But I can say that it was a good performance. So, yeah. So as a 54 on Rotten Tomatoes, the audience score is a 68, but the critics give it 54. So yeah, basically it came out in theaters April 24th, and it's now on DVD. You can find it on Redbox. The Age of Adeline is a fairy tale, if there ever was one, complete with like narration, like at the beginning and the end of the film. You have, once upon a time, there was a girl named Adeline, kind of a thing. So it's definitely a fairy tale, and it's about a girl named Adeline Bowman who gets in a car wreck, and through a series of complicated scientific events, which the narrator tells us will be discovered in like 2033 or something, all the stars lined up essentially, and she was struck by lightning as she fell into frozen water or something, and whatever that happened to her body was that she can no longer age. So she is now theoretically immortal, although I guess if you stabbed her in the face, I guess she would die, but she just won't age.
She's like an elf.
Yeah, pretty much, yeah. So think of her as like the Age of Galadriel.
Not dark, but beautiful and terrible as the
never mind. That's another thing. But yeah, no. So yeah, that's the basic premise of the Age of Adeline. She has every 10 years she takes a new identity, changes over her driver's license and all this stuff, and so that it appears as new names and everything, so that it appears the actual Adeline is dead and whatever. So obviously there's a little bit of strange happenings with the fact that she's now essentially younger than her daughter, who is in her late 60s. And all of these, random kind of, strange things, like she has a dog who is the great, grand dog of her original dog or whatever. I don't know. Anyway, just these things that happen when you don't age. And so essentially the story follows that she has secluded herself basically from she doesn't want anybody to take photos of her. She doesn't want to have anything to do socially. So she has just a few select friends in each of these lives that she kind of takes every 10 years. And she starts to fall in love with a man who obviously wants her to open up and wants her to be, an actual, steady figure in his life. And she wants to remain unattached so that she doesn't get hurt later by, the fact that he's going to age and die and she won't. So anyway, all of this happens.
Reminded me of a little bit. Sorry to cut you off, but
you're good.
I'm seeing a link to recently reviewed Bicentennial Man in that way.
Yeah, no, it's not unlike that too much. I mean, it's. I
mean, at least with that.
Yeah, no,
very
sure.
Broad theme, but
Right, but yeah, you're right, because Bicentennial Man is sort of that same way.
Mm-hmm.
So Blake Lively's character is, falling for this guy, and look, here's the thing: it's when it kicks into high gear with this. The movie's a little bit predictable, but I don't mind predictability as long as it's interesting to watch. Right, because if you go into Ant-Man, you can pretty much predict that at the end Ant-Man's going to win, as long as it's still interesting that you watch the journey. I think that's really all that matters sometimes. So I will say this is a little predictable, but it's a fairy tale, and fairy tales are pretty predictable. So I mean, Pinocchio, right? You know how that's going to end. He's going to get his wish, and Geppetto's going to have a son, and all of it, everything happily ever after. So it's a little predictable, but it's really not a problem as long as it's a good journey. And I do feel like it's a good journey. I think there's some good performances. Harrison Ford plays a role in the film, which I hesitate to really say too much about, but he plays a role in the film, and this is one of those rare occurrences I think recently where Harrison does seem totally committed to this part. And, a lot of times these older actors like him, or I'm looking at you, Bruce Willis, you don't care what movies you're in. You're just there and you collect your money and go. And there are times when even Harrison Ford has felt like that to me. But this is one of those rare times where I feel like he really genuinely enjoyed his time on the film. And I don't know why that is. I don't know what it was about it that really, stuck out to him as okay, I have to do this. I'm going to be passionate about it, and I'm going to do it right. But he does. And so that little burst of passion from Harrison Ford is something that I relate to. And there's some flashbacks to a young Harrison Ford in this film. And let me pull up the guy's name who plays young Harrison Ford in this. Son of a gun, I should have had this done. Okay,
Chris Pratt.
His name is Anthony Ingruber. If you look him up on IMDb or whatever, you'll see there's a strong resemblance between him and Harrison. And actually, the first time I saw Anthony Ingruber was on YouTube years ago, because he's been doing impressions of Harrison Ford, Jack Nicholson, a bunch of other actors on YouTube for a long time. So they sort of plucked him from that. And in a way, you can kind of tell he's doing an impression in his scenes. But he doesn't have a lot of screen time. And fair enough, if you weren't already aware that he's an impressionist, essentially, you might not pick up on it. Because he is in so little of it, but he's got Harrison's swagger, the young Harrison Ford swagger, and that sideways smile. And
yeah, I'm looking at him now.
Yeah, he definitely has his mannerisms down. If you look at, there's one picture on there, he's in a green army jacket.
Yeah, that's the one.
I mean, yeah, he's very Harrison Ford, and he definitely sells it. And that, I remember when I saw the trailer and I saw him as young Harrison Ford, I thought, all right, now I've got to see the movie, because I want to see him play young Harrison Ford for real and not just on YouTube. And while he doesn't get a lot of screen time, he certainly does his job and does it well. So anyway, yeah, so essentially the film's a little predictable, but it's not a bad predictability because it is interesting to watch. keep in mind that it is a fairy tale, so there are fairy tale-y things. So, like the magical whatever behind her strange case or whatever. Mm-hmm. And then also, if this were a straight through and through drama, you might expect to get into some of like Adeline's psyche, and while there's certainly moments where you see, okay, yeah, she's protecting herself from pain of, watching people grow old. A true drama would have taken that further and explored and showed us more of the life that she had that she's now lost. And this doesn't really do that. This is more focused on the love story, just like a fairy tale would be. While there's more to know probably about Cinderella, what's important really is just this little 3-day chunk of time in her life. So with Age of Adeline, it's that same way. While there's I think a lot of story to tell with her through the years, this is really just about this little tiny chunk of her of her life now. And, so don't expect any deep, dramatic stuff like that. But I would say it like this. It's a charming film with some good performances from people who care. It's, well directed in that it's not poorly directed. It's not like I'm going to be like, this direction sucks, but I'm also not going to be like, this is amazing. But it's well directed. And it's interesting to watch. It's fun to watch, so here's what I would say. I would recommend it, but be aware if you are averse to narration or to the fairy tale type of film, you probably won't care for it very much. But if you're like me and you just a lot of times just like to watch it and just see if everything kind of fits and everything works together, this really does. Everybody knows it's a fairy tale. Everybody knows it's a romantic comedy. Or really not a comedy, but romantic. Everybody knows that, and it's played very well. And so what I would say is this is a modern day fairy tale that is not a waste of your time, because there certainly are modern day fairy tales that are a waste of your time. So yeah, I enjoyed it. I may not go out and buy it on Blu-ray, but I enjoyed it.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, I saw another documentary, and it's called Divorce Corp. Mm-hmm. And I heard about it not from him, but I heard about it by listening to Dr. Drew mm-hmm. Pinsky, who narrates it, and I kept hearing Divorce Corp, so it finally showed up on Netflix, I think. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to read the IMDb summary because that's probably a lot better than kind of how I would sum up what it aims to do. Let me enlarge the page a little bit. More money flows through the family courts and into the hands of courthouse insiders than in all other court systems in America combined, over $50 billion a year and growing. Through extensive research and interviews with the nation's top divorce lawyers, mediators, judges, politicians, litigants, and journalists, this documentary uncovers how children are torn from their homes, unlicensed custody evaluators extort money, and abusive judges play God with people's lives while enriching their friends. This explosive documentary reveals the family courts as unregulated, extra-constitutional fiefdoms. Rather than assist victims of domestic crimes, these courts often precipitate them. And rather than help parents and children move on, as they are mandated to do, these courts and their associates drag out cases for years, sometimes decades, ultimately resulting in a rash of social ills, including home foreclosure, bankruptcy, suicide, and violence. Solutions to the crisis are sought out in countries where divorce is handled in a more holistic manner. So it's essentially, it's about, basically how shitty divorce is. Yeah. And I'm going to talk a few technical things before I get into what I thought about it. This film has a 50% on Rotten Tomatoes. But that's also from 10 reviews. So it's a not very big pool of people.
Sure.
And the negative ones I saw, I mean, either some of them just didn't make sense. I'm not even going to read what this one person wrote because it doesn't. There's no conclusion to it. One guy said it was melodramatic. One person said, the solutions are thin, and the victim stories are flimsy and one-sided. But the people who liked it, one guy said, after you see this entertaining documentary, you will be depressed about the U.S. divorce industry and may vow to never get married or have kids. And it's
wow.
And some people say, well, anyone who's been divorced will see, will feel, the reminders of the destructive process, and any engaged couple should see it. Period. So I'm my feelings on this are sort of an amalgam of all those opinions because, what I took from it mostly is I can't really speak to the validity of the claims. But you could say that about anything. I don't really know how to respond to a criticism of basically someone saying, well, we don't know if that's true. It's like, right. Well, it must be true enough for enough people, but this is a whole thing, a whole bigger discussion of how certain things are on the news a lot, and so you think that you would think from the amount the news focused on gay marriage or African American violence that gays and African Americans were actually a large percentage of the population in America, but it's for at least for transgender people it's less than 0.1%, and black people it's less than 10%. So you can make anything seem not to diminish those the issues in those communities, but my point is you could make anything seem bigger or smaller than it really is. Sure. So the amount of people, but I do believe that with the divorce rate the way it is, that lots of people are going through this, and I don't think you can really find anyone who said my divorce was pretty smooth sailing, overall pleased. It seems like everyone's story is, it's just horrible, it's expensive, So I can't really sit here and say these are all true, and I can't really sit there and easily attack it and say that sounds like bullshit. What it sounds like to me is terrible. If the claims in this documentary are true, then it's a horrible industry because they point out how quick it is to retire as a judge, but then go back in as a lawyer the next day, and how a lot of times they found out that the judge ruled in favor of this lawyer because they actually went to law school together, and so there's nepotism, favoritism, and extortion. One dude straight up, they found out one of the custody evaluators had a gay porn site, and he was trying to tell this woman that she was an unfit mother for her children. It's how so lots of holes to poke in this industry. But I personally, as a person who is not divorced and hopes to never become divorced,
right.
I saw this as a reason, and I agree most with the person who said every engaged couple should see it. Because if nothing else, whether you're religious and don't believe in divorce, or whether you, regardless of any religious affiliation, just plan to have a good marriage, and never need divorce. I personally understand why people get divorced, but I myself am not a fan of it, or hope to never be put in that position. I aim to succeed in my endeavors, so I don't really have a contingency for if my marriage fails. In my mind, if it fails, I've got bigger problems than the divorce proceedings. But I must agree with that person, because I saw it mostly as a reason that people should work on their marriages, or that people should get into marriages for the right reasons. I didn't see it as a reason to get good divorce attorneys. I didn't see a reason to do prenup or whatever. I saw a reason to pick your partner well, and you'll never have to go through this.
Right.
So, because especially with what the kids go through, and just, if nothing else, just for the sheer cost, it's unbelievable.
Mm-hmm.
So, Divorce Corp is very entertaining, and if you have any sort of strong sense of justice like me, you'll sit there and you'll really feel for these victims and their situations, and it's heartbreaking. And so, I do think it's a must see, just because for me it's Scared Straight. You know, like,
yeah.
You know, you ought to see it if you're going to get married because, you know,
you'll understand
understand, like, if nothing else, if saving your marriage and reconciling with the person who's supposed to be your soulmate, your life partner, if that's not enough motivation for you to stay in your marriage, just think of your wallet.
Right, exactly.
I mean, if your kids and all that is not enough of a reason for you, at least think of the headache.
Sure. Yeah, exactly.
I'd hate to lower the bar.
At least be selfish enough to think of yourself.
You're right. Yeah, exactly. Like
I don't care about my husband. I don't care about my kids, but I ain't going through that.
Yeah, I don't want to lose my house and move back in with my parents. Screw that.
Yeah.
You know, so, anyway, entertaining. So, you know, Divorce Corp. It's on Netflix. It's free-ish. So,
yeah.
Go watch it.
Awesome.
I do think we have a little bit of time for a topic discussion. Dustin, do you want to get into this?
Let's do it.
So, I didn't watch the Emmys, and I don't think you did either, Dustin, because one, it's like 3 hours of watching one thing.
Right, exactly.
And filled with people I hate. And
pretty much, yeah.
With results I can Google online.
Exactly. No, that's the biggest reason.
Yeah.
Like, okay, I'll wait 3 hours, do what I want to do for 3 hours, and then I'll Google it? Okay.
Yeah, so after just hearing some clips from the Emmys, because they played some on like this talk show I listen to that's about politics, and then I heard some on other podcasts, and so I got the gist of some people's speeches. So I'd like to say right off the bat that none of my comments hereforth are meant to diminish any sort of milestone in film or television. Specifically, the Best Actress win from Viola Davis. I think Regina King got one too for American Crime, being the first African American women to get, you know. So I don't want to diminish their accomplishments. They're both extremely talented actresses and all that. So,
absolutely.
But it got me thinking about how self-important Hollywood is. And it sort of got me thinking about, I'm growing increasingly, I wouldn't say my view has changed on the social significance of films, but perhaps I'm seeing it from a different perspective in terms of results. Like, I don't really know. To me, the only impact movies seem to have on like social views is normalizing things that aren't normal, which can be good, and it can be a lot of times maybe not good. I mean, you can show people enough propaganda, you know, for example, like in other countries, you know, of like in North Korea, like the films where like they kill Americans or whatever. They have other people playing Americans. I believe they have propaganda films. I think I read that somewhere. It kind of sounds like I made it up, but my point is, you can show them that, and you can normalize the idea of the West should be killed. So there's that. But I don't. But I'm thinking more about like the George Clooney's of the world and the people who. I don't really know what I'm trying to say. I guess my main question is: do you think film is important or just self-important? Like, do you think that film really does as much good? Like, I just feel like Hollywood's full of people who go like, you know, who think like I'm doing so much good through my acting, and I'm giving a voice to people who have no voices, and I'm doing this and that, and I just want to scream, shut up! Like, you're making movies and they're entertaining, and that's great, you know. And you should be proud that you're good at your job. You should take pride in that you're good at your job. But when you start talking about how important or impactful your work is, I just snooze or tune out because, I mean, I personally just don't care. But I just feel like no, you pretend to be somebody else. You know, you get multiple takes to do something right. You know, you get multiple chances to do something right. You're paid, you know, eventually, depending on your status.
Even if you don't do something right, the editors can still save it.
Yeah, exactly. Like, you know, and you know, you collect your money, you go home, and granted, certain films are more difficult than others. Certain films, shoot higher than others. You know, obviously everyone might agree that The Avengers is not an important film at all, but some people I think get a little bit on a pedestal about their indie film and what it says about the gay community or something. And I just feel like they're self-important, and I mostly feel like, you know, it's unearned. I don't know. What do you think?
I think that it's both self-important and important. I think that, well, what I mean by that is that it's too self-important, but it is important. They're not in proportion, in other words. So I think, all right, so if we extend this out, right, so film is an art, and art has and always will be an important part of expression and of both imitating life, imitating culture, and creating it. Mm-hmm. That's the purpose of art. And so it is important to have that way to express, because not everybody communicates, or rather expresses verbally, or, you know, is a good what am I trying to say? I guess what I'm trying to say is not everybody expresses themselves in the exact same way. So it's good to have all of these options available to us. My issue with this, I think, is similar to your issue. They may be the same, in that I think that there are certain disciplines that make themselves out to be more important than they are. Not that they aren't important, but they seem to think of themselves higher than they ought to. I think if we're looking at all disciplines, one of the best examples of this is the scientific community. We're in a place in our culture now, I feel, where scientists and that community of scientific minds believe themselves to be of utmost importance. In other words, science is more important than philosophy, more important than, you know, language, more important than, you know, arithmetic, which really goes with science. But that science, in essence, is the definition of all things. But it isn't. You know, I believe it was Stephen Hawking who said philosophy is dead, science has replaced it, essentially. Well, that can't be true. It can never be true, because all of these disciplines are important to study, and all of them are important in helping understand fully the world in which you live. And I believe that art is one of those things. It helps people understand. It helps people empathize. It helps people, at the very least, just escape from their own lives, take a temporary vacation. And this applies to music, because how often are you like angry and you put on some music and it changes your emotional mindset?
Outlook. Yeah, mindset.
So these art is important for a number of different reasons, and film is an art, so therefore is important. I think you're hitting the nail on the head when you say that, you know, the George Clooney's of the world or whatever. But if we extend that even further and look at something like football, it's very much the same thing. Here's a guy who gets paid an enormous amount of money to do a thing that he does well. But what he does in the long run doesn't seem so important, because essentially football is escapism. Football is the shallow end of, you know, what might be considered like an artistic pool. Because you mentioned Avengers. Avengers may also be on that shallow side. But so, like I said, is football, so is reality television. These things aren't, all they are like a reason to escape from yourself, which I think can be useful. But yes, I do think that Hollywood, that television, that all of this stuff is far more what's the word? Aggrandizing? Is that the word?
Yeah, aggrandizing.
Than it ought to be. Because while it may do good, it's a good that really, A, can't be calculated, and B, it is not the only good that there is to do. So I agree with you, but I guess I look at it as film, and I think you do too, is that film is important. The art is important because all disciplines are important because they all have their own functions. But you're absolutely right when people say things like, "Oh, well, my indie film is giving voice to the voiceless." Well, it's really not, because all it really is doing is giving voice to what is in you. And so the voiceless is yourself, right? And you mentioned propaganda. Right. If you look at the definition of propaganda, Google says it like this. It's derogatory, and it says, information, especially of a biased or misleading nature, used to promote or publicize a particular political cause or point of view. So, sort of by that definition, I think pretty much everything is propaganda. Because pretty much anything that, I mean, obviously you're talking about the Avengers. Yeah, it probably doesn't promote any particular point of view. But a lot of things, all of these artistic things that we talk about, these deep, like canvases of artistry, all show the point of view of the creator, right? So whether that be the screenwriter or the director or the actor or however deep you want to look at it. So I don't know. Is there such thing as art that isn't propaganda?
I guess not. If the whole point of propaganda is that it's biased or subjective, then since art can only be subjective, I guess it's technically propaganda.
Since it's all self-expression and you're expressing your own point of view.
I guess it's thinly propaganda. I think the social context of propaganda probably is what really gives it its definition. Like, sure. But then again, propaganda implies that whatever they're pushing is, it implies that whatever they're pushing is not the truth. You hear propaganda like Nazi propaganda, American nationalistic propaganda, war propaganda. Like, you never hear it as like, oh, I was reading my kids some propaganda the other day about, Christ. Like, right. Because it sounds like you're being sarcastic and that you're brainwashing them instead of saying I was reading my children the Bible,
Right.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, I guess in terms of like the micro, what film does in the micro may overall have a macro effect in terms of like, if you can influence the individual, you can influence society because it's full of individuals. Like, I watch certain films repeatedly because they cause me to feel certain ways. The same reason people listen to music. I mean, I'll listen to like, if I'm running, like I at this point I can only really or if I'm really tired and while I'm trying to drive, I have to listen to like metal, because it causes my heart rate to increase. That's the effect it has on me. I'll watch certain films. Not that movies are the only way to influence my behavior; they're certainly not. But I'll watch certain films to remind me to be not to remind me to be kind to people. God, that's a bad example. I guess what I'm saying is certain films have a reaction, give me a reaction. And I can't remember what movie it even is. So I can't really give it as an example, but like there was a movie I would watch for a while because I just really loved the way it made me feel after it. Like I would just, whether it was an example, and the same reason you'd read like a book or perhaps the Bible or any other thing where you have a person who is unendingly kind to other people, just to see an example of it that you can see, you can watch and listen to in action. Maybe that's why so many people would watch these movies, these Christian films, because they read the Bible and they have the example of Jesus, but a lot of times they want to see it. And so because people are visual and that's how they respond. So like, so in that way it has an effect. And if that film causes them to remember what would Jesus do and therefore treat others with kindness and acceptance and love, then in that way film is important. But is film important or was just the story important? You know what I mean? Like is Jesus,
in that
example, it's like,
say, I mean, you were talking a couple podcasts ago about United 93 having an emotional effect on you when you watch it. You know, I would say that there are a lot of people who watch movies like that for that reason, because it allows them to feel something that they either want to feel or, you know, are currently feeling, depending on how you react. I mean, sometimes if you're sad, you listen to sad music. You don't always listen to happy music to make you feel better. Sometimes you like to listen to sad music. But, you know, it might be the same reason you might watch, like, The Pursuit of Happiness to remind yourself to be grateful for what you have, or, you know, Radio, or like Forrest Gump to remind you of, you know, like, just the way that there are, like you said, kind people out there who just love living and love, you know, whatever it is that they're around. They have that ability to pass that on, and you as a viewer, as a spectator, get that passed on to you as well. Mm-hmm. So there are a lot of reasons to watch movies. You look at something like Spider-Man. Spider-Man doesn't really make me feel anything in terms of like, oh, I should be, you know, with great power comes great responsibility. Might be the tip of, you know, what it might make you feel or make you want to do. But sometimes Spider-Man or the Avengers or, you know, Superman or Batman or whatever is escapism, and it's, let me watch somebody who is either like me or not like me at all deal with problems that either I have or are exaggerated versions of problems I have. And so, or it could be none of the above, and it could just be, let me watch a guy punch some things. And, yeah. But all of them are important because all of them give you an outlet. And even in the grand scheme of things, as far as film goes, film is worth it, I guess, and it is important if it inspires more filmmakers, if it inspires more people to dream and more people to push themselves in a specific discipline, then, you know, it's important for that reason. So, yeah, I think there are a lot of reasons. I think what maybe you and I don't enjoy is the amount of publicity or like recognition that Hollywood tends to give itself for things. Case in point is all of the award shows. You got Golden Globes, you got SAG Awards, you got Emmys, you got Oscars, you've got all of these things that just never seem to end. And they all are doing the exact same thing. They're all going to congratulate Milk. They're all going to congratulate, like, 12 Years a Slave. They're all going to gang up and like, you know, promote that thing because it has a voice, whereas something like Avengers may not. So, but it just seems like a never-ending barrage of self-patting of backs.
Yeah.
And I think that's what annoys me about it. It's a lack of humility, a lack of, like, what I do is fun, and what I do is great, and what I do may help somebody. But keep in mind there are people out there putting their lives on the line. Keep in mind there are people out there that work 5 jobs, you know, to support their family or whatever it is. You know, it just seems so like, hey, I'm making millions. It's easy for me to say, look at the good I do by giving 1% of my fortune to, you know, needy people in Haiti or whatever.
I don't know if people have been following it or if it seems the way I feel, but like I've had an increasingly pessimistic view of the film industry in the past few years. When we started going to college, I was really fascinated with how they were made. And that's still the only side. And then I got into like more into the creative side of like the storytelling, and that interested me. And then as I got out of it, you know, and you learn more and more about how the business side of it works, the more I hear about it from either actors on podcasts or former producers or other people, it's like, because it's an industry run it's an artistic industry. It's a the commercializing of art. You're trying to quantify something that is purely subjective, and so there's always going to be some sort of mismatch of how much value a thing has or a person has. And I think I get fed up a lot of times with. I think that's why I got pushed more and more into just wanting to watch blockbusters as the pure escapism, because I don't see a social agenda in the Marvel movies. You know what I mean? I just see fun and action and spectacle, and that's all I'm asking for. And then I see, I see these posters for like The Martian with Matt Damon, and all I can think of is just like I can't stand that guy because of how important he thinks he is, and I've said this before. I hate that influences my outlook of him or his films, because Matt Damon's a great actor, but I feel like I can't stand him. I just wish he'd shut his mouth and act. But then again, it's like, well, who am I to tell him to shut up? Like, he's a human being. This is a free country, at least right now. And he can say whatever he wants. It's his opinion. It's his platform. Like, what do I care?
Sure.
Perhaps I'm envious. What is it? So, I mean,
I think
there's that too, but like I also think like and that's why it pushed me away from indie films, because all I hear is indie directors bitching about how important they are, but and this and that. But then again, it's like every now and then I'll see maybe some sort of indie project, and but I feel like I have to do a bunch of research into like the intent or the outlook of the person before I can say this movie's good, and also you're humble. And therefore, I like your film. And I should just judge the film on its own merits. But then it's just like, when I find out what you think of yourself and that you're such a narcissist, it just makes me hate your work.
Well, I think that comes from a couple different things. The first is that we, like you said, we know too much about people. And so you look at something like the Fantastic Four, and what should be great escapism is sort of ruined by how big of a jerk Josh Trank is to everybody. Even though the movie's probably a bad movie just on its own. Josh Trank isn't doing it any favors, because we know too much about him. We hear him talk as, nonsense to everybody and like push problems that the movie had off on everybody else. That's unappealing, and that's bad salesmanship. So that makes sense. But I think maybe the reason it seems that way is point number 2, which is that Hollywood has become increasingly good at 2 things. One, it either sells, like you said, escapism, spectacle, blockbuster, robots fighting robots kind of stuff with little to no point of view. And the reason it does that is because those things sell, because people like not having stuff pushed down their throats. People like just going and chilling and having a good time with their friends. And the reason those things sell so well too is because you can sell it in any market, in any culture, and it does well because it's not promoting anything. Right? That's why China's numbers are up and up and up and up and up, because everything that we're sending over to China to like have them watch is spectacle. Because if we sent something like freaking like
Age of
W
Adelaide
over there.
No.
What did you say?
I said Age of Adelaide or Adeline.
Yeah, whatever.
Just bring it back around.
Sure. It wouldn't sell so much because it's so entrenched in like the Western mindset. So if you just make something that's just popcorn, it's going to sell everywhere. But so that's one thing that Hollywood's making, and the other thing that Hollywood is making is, and I think you touched on this, it all sells the same point of view. Well, I'll just call it out. I think there's a liberal message throughout Hollywood, and you'll see things like Elysium, or you'll see things like maybe the Martian coming up. Who knows? But both with Matt Damon. Who knows? Anyway, you'll see things like that keep cropping up because that's what Hollywood puts out. So I think the second point of this whole thing is that we know too much about people, and we know to expect now that they are either extreme liberals, or at the very least, like a libertarian kind of a thing. And they're going to be like pushing various social issues in their private life, and that spills into their films. And so the issue for people like you and I who lean to the right is we don't see our voices spoken in Hollywood. And that's what drags us down. I think that's what drags me down is I wish there were more voices to the right that were allowed to make movies and given money to make those movies. And then when something comes out, I wouldn't be, like you said, like, okay, let me go see what this guy thinks. Let me go see what this filmmaker thinks. Because I wouldn't just expect it to make me mad. I wouldn't just expect it to be opposite of me. So I may be less likely to seek it out because it could be anything. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So to me, I feel like maybe one of the biggest reasons that you're disillusioned with film and that to a degree I am is that the point of view that's coming out of Hollywood right now is all the same point of view.
Yeah.
They're not allowing an alternate point of view. So, for instance, like if I look at my movie shelf right now, and let me just start at the top. I could probably go maybe one little shelf in before I start finding movies that wouldn't be made now because they'd be considered too traditional or too conservative. On one shelf, I've got 12 Angry Men and A Bridge Too Far mixed with like 22 Jump Street and The 40-Year-Old Virgin, all on the same shelf. We're just dealing with like the tip of my movie shelf here. And there's already examples of movies that probably wouldn't be made today because they'd be considered too conservative. And that to me is, kind of strange. I mean, is that not one of the reasons why we're seeing less and less Westerns? Is that not one of the reasons we're seeing less and less honest movies like American Sniper? Really, there's only Clint Eastwood out there to do anything. And he's the only one that's going to make a Western. He's the only one that's going to do that anymore. And all the Westerns that come out other than that are like True Grit, which is a remake of an older film, but is like not ironic in a way.
Yeah.
But it never seemed like a full, like, hey, this is a Western. It feels more like a, hey, we're going to like be an ironic Western, if that makes sense. I don't know. It just kind of had that tone to it.
In the case of American Sniper, I mean, I feel like, people were just railing against Chris Kyle, who, not that, it's not like he died, the day before the film was out, but recently deceased soldier. And one thing that the left and Hollywood always will do is say, oh, I support the troops, while, being anti-war in all cases themselves. But because, and Clint Eastwood's, a liberal himself, but, he made a movie about a guy who was very conservative, which was, one aspect of his character. And just the fact that, like, the dude's from Texas and his military and takes pride in protecting his fellow soldiers with lethal force, they're just like, oh, it's terrible. It's a terrible film. Like, actually, It's a well-executed film about a guy you probably disagreed with politically or morally, but,
I disagree morally with Don Vito Corleone, but it doesn't make that film any less incredible. Yeah.
Exactly. I just on a side of the political spectrum that preaches tolerance, and a side of the entertainment spectrum that preaches tolerance. All these people do is shut up people who disagree with them and walk around and pat themselves on the back and each other on the back. I mean, it's like you said, most of these films preach the same message. So what discussion does it spark except for, look at us, we're all heroes. Look at the work we do. We're all heroes. We're making a movie espousing this belief that is incredibly, popular. I mean, it's not daring to make a most films in Hollywood anymore. One, because they're all remakes, and so they're literally not blazing any new trails, but they're not introducing any new ideas or conversations either. So if you're arguing your film's important, it really isn't, because you're making a movie that you're being paid lots of money for, that introduces, just for example, a left-wing liberal point of view into a country where it's popular to be left-wing or liberal, and especially in an industry that's left-wing or liberal. That's the definition. It's walking into the ocean and basically saying, like, I'm afraid of sharks, but you're in like a pool where there are no sharks, and you're saying, look at how brave I am. No, there's no sharks. There's no danger. There's no, not that there has to be, but just don't say what you're doing is important when it not really. You're not challenging anything. You're just beating the same drum, and people eat that shit up because you convince them to eat it up. You say, what I'm doing is important, and people who are gullible say, you're right, it is, because you said it is, and who am I to disagree with you, because everyone's entitled to their opinion, and you're famous and I'm not, so you must be right.
And the people who eat it up tend to agree, so you'll always value or place on somebody the definition of hero if they just validate what you already believe.
Yes, so, exactly. I mean, they're telling you what you want to hear, therefore you listen.
Right. I mean, that's one of the reasons why when a movie comes out that is like very obviously pushing something, or very obviously one way. So we'll use something recent like War Room for an example. I never saw War Room, but it's a film made by Christians, essentially for Christians, and it came out in the wide market, which is great and phenomenal. But if you look at like the Rotten Tomato score, it's very low. But the audience loved it, because the audience is made up of people who just enjoy being validated for what they already believe. In other words, it itself is not blazing any new trails either, because it's not reaching out to people other than just who it already will validate, if that makes sense. So it works both ways, but the point is, I think a lot of this would simmer down if not everything were about a political cause, and especially the same political cause. Because I think probably Marlon Brando started this. I think when he won for The Godfather, he sent a Native American girl up there to accept the award on his behalf, and she spoke about like the way that Native Americans have been treated in America. And while that may be an important issue, that was sort of like the tip of the iceberg for, let's just use any time that I can speak to spill out whatever I'm thinking in terms of like political causes. And what happens is, like you said, in an industry that is so leftist, when you watch something like the Emmys, you know before it even starts what everybody who gets up there is going to say and what everybody who gets up there is going to be about.
Well, it was just a bunch of. I heard some bits of the monologue, which I think Andy Samberg did. It sounded like he did a terrible job. And I think the Emmys has its lowest viewership, I believe, in years as well. But like, it was just joke after joke at the expense of Donald Trump. Which, okay, he's an easy target. That's fine. But none of the other political candidates, and certainly not Hillary Clinton or Bernie Sanders.
Sure.
So it's just like, again, Trump's the easiest one, but I think Hillary Clinton's an easy target too for some jokes as well. So
yeah, absolutely.
But we dare not speak against Hillary Clinton because, it's just
because
bullshit.
all the trustees at the Emmys will pull their money out if you start doing that to Hillary Clinton, because everybody's a big baby.
I gotta stop talking about this because it's descending my mood. But my point is just like politicians and Hollywood alike they're just a bunch of bullshit artists. They are. Yeah. And like a few episodes ago, I talked about how I caught up on Veep, and I'm eventually going to get to House of Cards. But if you want to talk about art influencing my outlook, I mean, I already knew this for myself, but. Again, popularize the idea, but they're all just a bunch of politicians and Hollywood people are all just a bunch of bullshit artists. They're paid essentially to tell people what they want to hear, and tout it as new or interesting or innovative or progressive, and it's just change for the sake of change, or it's just empty rhetoric with no actual meaning attached to it. And I see it in both arenas, and I hate it. It depresses me about the, it makes me get depressed about the human condition and how people conduct themselves, and it's so depressing. So, so if people are wondering why most of the movies I'm talking about in the podcast are all comic book films, it's because they have no social agenda. It's not full of characters who piss me off and depress me. It's generally life-affirming characters. Heroes tend to be maybe that's the correlation for me. I like life-affirming films. I like things that make me optimistic about humanity. And
that's why I like Batman so much. Batman's a guy who took a weakness, a guy who took something that should make him just wallow in his loneliness and depression and turn that into a strength. That's the reason I like Spider-Man. It's a guy who, even though life continually beats him down, he continually stands back up. That's the reason I like Superman, a guy who's so emotionally and morally strong that everybody always says you can't come up with a good villain for him. So those are the characters I like, and I'm sorry if they're not as deep as any number of whatever other characters, but those are the top three for me because they affirm how beautiful life can be and how strong you can be in weakness, and I don't know. Yeah, I agree with you, man.
It really is it's not just the spectacle of superhero movies. It really is just, most of the time, even if it's as simple as just the idea that they are preventing loss of life, it could be that broad and simple, but it also tends to be people who, either anti-heroes who despise humanity but will not cross the line of taking life and therefore saving life. Anti-heroes, like the Han Solos of the world, the people who are just like, I'm a mess and I hate myself and I hate everyone, but there are worse people than me and I should protect the weaker ones. To the Spider-Mans who are beaten down by life but still believe in good things and still have good hearts and in people and are always trying to save or redeem others. That's the message I want. Outside of some cool action and some interesting visual stuff, it's the idea that it is an apolitical person who the only message is that life is precious and that life is valuable, and the weak should be protected from the predatory, which should be a no-brainer, but for some reason it's just dismissed as empty spectacle, and it's not empty spectacle. It is not.
No.
So,
I mean, if you look, I think maybe a good thing for us to do, Hooper, would be to do an episode where we do talk about our top 10 or however many movies of all time. Yeah. Because I think that will tell people and ourselves on just sort of introspection about what it is that we value and what it is that we find so important about these films. Because if you go through things like, one of my favorite movies is On the Waterfront. I'm staring at it right now on my shelf. And it's about a man who his dreams are crushed and then he stands up to the mob. These are people who have a strong sense of justice and who, despite the fact that they themselves are flawed, despite the fact that they themselves haven't achieved what they wanted to achieve, will always persevere. And that, to me, that's stronger than anything you can say about any political view, because that's not a political view. That's a philosophical, that's a moral, that's a human rule. So anyway, I don't know.
Part of what I try to do with this podcast, I mean, what it does for me personally is it allows me an outlet to do one of my favorite things, which is creatively analyze creative things with my good friend Dustin. But what it does for me, just outside of all that, or inside of all that, which way I don't know, but it's my therapy to reconcile my interest in film with my disinterest in the people who make them. Yeah. I despise, or at least mildly dislike, most of the people in the film industry. I just do. They're either ignorant or they're just liars to me. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I enjoy their art, and I can take it at face value. So it's really my way of reconciling the kind of person I am, with the deep understanding, with the which way I lean morally and politically, with my interest in always delving deeper into this field, which was full of just people and things I don't like,
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, I should mention also, I mean, we're about out of time, but just so I don't seem biased myself, in theaters now is the aforementioned The Martian, starring Matt Damon, who I'd like to mention one more thing that he said, just so that people don't think I hate Matt Damon. He said something recently, I think, there was some guy who asked Tom Hardy about his sexuality at an interview or something, and Tom Hardy was like, I don't know. Or he was more like, what's the guy? Like, he said something, I couldn't understand it. I think from the little blurb I read, it seemed like Matt Damon said something like actors shouldn't reveal their sexuality, and then people were like, "Oh, you don't think they should? Why should they closet themselves?" And I think he came on to like some talk show and was just like, "No, I meant that they're more effective if their interests or their proclivity, or at least I think he was talking about their sexual proclivities. If they kept their sexuality more not ambiguous, but just didn't really talk about it, it made them more effective and mysterious." And I thought, well, that's weird coming from you,
right? Open book over here.
But I agree that you wouldn't think of if Humphrey Bogart was still around, and I think Rob Lowe was saying this like on a podcast. Think if Humphrey Bogart was still around and you had TMZ following him, to like Whole Foods, with like the mystery and ambiguity of that guy would be completely gone. Yeah, and that's a whole nother discussion about the transparency of these people. But actors, I was fine with actors just seeing them as characters, because as I'm unable to separate them, unless they completely transform, I'm unable to separate them mostly from their political or social agenda. I just like seeing them play parts and maybe hearing some of them in interviews, but I think I'd be better off if I just didn't know anything about them anymore,
Yeah, true.
So anyway, but yeah, I mean, The Martian, I didn't see a single trailer for it, but people are saying it looks really good, and I'm sure it's a very good film.
It does look good.
So I won't see it, but not because of Matt Damon, just because of money.
Sure.
But yeah, I'd be curious to see how much it links up with Interstellar. Like if it could be an a spinoff of Interstellar.
Yeah.
So maybe at the end of The Martian, he doesn't get back home, and then he's stuck in space, and Matthew McConaughey shows up, and that's why all the events of Interstellar happen.
That would be awesome.
Yeah, that'd be sweet.
Yeah. I don't know if you know this, or if it would actually pique your interest or not, but Drew Goddard wrote the screenplay for that.
Oh, okay. I mean, I'm going to see it eventually.
Sure.
Well, anyway, you guys, that's all the time. Google us, HooperCast, all that stuff. We'll see you guys next week. We're doing something cool, a little bit different, but kind of special for the 100th episode.
Yeah.
So, well, maybe I should I'll go ahead and say it real quick, just because we're already over. So fuck it. We're gonna do John, and Dustin are gonna do our top 5 favorite superhero movies to stick with what's becoming our theme rapidly.
I know, right?
But maybe if you want to, you can email us if any of you guys actually have keyboards. So far, the answer is no. Of wanting to contact us with stuff. If you want to even comment a list of your top 5 and why, it might be interesting to hear other people's points of view on their favorite superhero films. We just gave you a clue of what might influence ours, the life-affirming part of it. So, maybe send us your lists, and I don't know. So that's gonna be our 100th episode. Is a top 5 list from the 3 of us. So,
oh yeah.
So yeah, that'll be, I suppose, this is 97. That will be 3 weeks from now. So
awesome.
There you go. Anyway, thanks for listening, everybody. Google us, and we'll see you next time. Goodbye.
HooperCast, roll out.
HooperCast, roll out. And goodbye. Prime.